Hello, and welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations, a podcast brought to you by SurvivingBreastCancer.org. I'm Laura Carfing, breast cancer survivor and founder of SurvivingBreastCancer.org, a nonprofit organization providing community, education, and resources to empower those diagnosed with breast cancer and their caregivers from day one and beyond. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Breast Cancer Conversations. We are continuing our marathon series of key takeaways from the 2023 San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium. Today's topic is on antibody drug conjugates. So let's dive right in. Welcome to the conversation.
Now we're going to go to something different, antibody drug conjugates. There are a lot of these. We're going to talk about what they are, some approved examples. So Enhertu is one, as well as Trodelvy. And something to keep in mind about these is there are different ones, and there are different ones for all different subtypes. So no matter your subtype, at this point, there is an ADC for you. And there are a ton coming down the line. And what I mean by that is lots in clinical trials and many in preclinical trials, which would be like in mice or in cell lines. The goal with these is to decrease side effects because, as many of us know, hopefully not personally, but many of us personally, there are a lot of side effects and they can be really detrimental. And then, of course, maintain and increase the effectiveness. So these are two things that are really being worked on in labs to get these to be more tolerable and to increase their effectiveness. So first, we're going to talk about what they are. So if you can, next slide, please. Awesome. So what is an antibody drug conjugate? The good thing about this word is that it describes exactly what this guy is. So on the right of the slide, you're going to see this big blob, and it looks like a Y. So, a little YMCA. So antibodies are these really big molecules that your body uses for defense. And when you think about COVID antibodies, that's an antibody that sticks to the COVID virus. And what we're looking at and what has been engineered in the lab for these ADCs are antibodies that stick to cancer cells. So the whole role of the antibody is to stick to a cancer cell. For example, Enhertu. Enhertu sticks to HER2 on the outside of HER2 positive cancer cells, right? So the antibody is kind of the targeting molecule. So then the next part is the drug. So the drug, in all cases that are approved as of now, is a cytotoxic drug or a chemotherapy. So basically you'll see there's little red balls stuck to that big Y molecule, and those are the chemotherapy drugs. And so what these do is what they do normally, which is kill cells, right? Kill rapidly dividing cells. So the antibody tracks to the cancer cell, and then the cytotoxic drug kills it. And that's really how they're supposed to work. There's a lot of problems and good things and bad things, but we won't go into that. Now, you also need something to conjugate or link those two together, and that's the linker. So FDA-approved examples are Enhertu. We talked about Trodelvy. So the antibody sticks to TROP2. But Trodelvy, you don't have to have a test for TROP2. It's been approved for hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, and also metastatic triple negative breast cancer. So that's really important, as again, there are many in clinical trials and development. And we're going to talk about two clinical trials really quickly that were presented at SABCS.
Hey, Amy, while you're preparing, can I just say real quick, one of the things shared by a couple of the advocates that attended was choosing the treatment type is based on where you are in your life. Sometimes you'll tolerate worse side effects when you're younger versus when you're older, or if you're raising kids or not kids. So I wanted to share that was spoken about at several of the sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. Like, we all have different tolerabilities based on a lot of things going on in our lives, et cetera. And luckily, Katie's going to talk about some specific toxicities too. So that's a really good point. Thank you, Amy. So the first ADC I'm going to talk about is Datopotamab Deruxtecan, which is a mouthful. Sometimes you'll hear this called DATO-DXD, but my favorite name is Dato Potato. Literally, you will hear oncologists call it that. So that's fun. This is an antibody drug conjugate that has in the past been studied in metastatic triple negative breast cancer. But the study that was presented at SABCS was in hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative or low, who had previously been treated with a couple lines of chemotherapy. And they compared this to the investigator's choice of chemotherapy. And that just means what chemotherapy the oncologist wanted to give. So there was a comparison. They found that patients who received DATO-DXD survived a couple more months than those who received the investigator's choice of chemotherapy. And something you'll hear a lot is that we're still waiting on the overall survival data because it takes longer, which really is good because that means people are living longer. We want the overall survival data to take a long time, even though it does make it difficult as we wait for the drugs to be here. But that's something to keep in mind. Also side effects. So compared to the chemotherapy, DATO-DXD had less neutropenia, which means less low white blood cell counts, but there were more mouth sores. So stomatitis is mouth sores. So that's one of the known side effects of DATO-DXD. And we'll talk, and Katie's going to talk more about side effect management in a little bit. There were more all-grade side effects, which we won't talk about, but there were fewer very serious side effects. And there were also some eye side effects, which you can see with antibody drug conjugates. They also studied the quality of life and time to decline, which was 9 months in DATO-DXD versus 4.8 months. So something to take away from this, I think, is just that there's a lot going on in the slide, but we are seeing increased progression-free survival, which is good. And we are seeing different kinds of toxicities and different kinds of side effects. And this will be a running theme for different antibody drug conjugates. All right, next slide. I'm going to go through this one a little bit faster. Another drug that was tested in combination with DATO-DXD. So you're taking DATO-DXD and combining it with an immunotherapy called durvalumab. This was done in advanced and metastatic triple negative breast cancer as first-line therapy. It was an early phase trial, so phase 1-2, there's no comparison arm, but they did find that the progression-free survival was almost 14 months, and 79% had a complete response or a partial response, meaning their tumors shrunk completely or partially shrunk. They also saw side effects such as stomatitis. These are the mouth sores, which makes sense because they're using DATO-DXD. But they also saw nausea, which is, I think, characteristic of durvalumab as well. So this was, and also when you hear these funny terms like begonia and tropics O2, and oh my gosh, they always give clinical trials funny names, not funny names, just names. They're just names. And I can't remember what goes with what. So if you can't, don't worry about it, but you can always look it up. So this was the Begonia trial, Arm 7. They're going to look at this a little bit more depth coming up.
Yeah, so I get to share a little bit or talk a little bit about the side effects and management when it comes to ADCs. And I, for better or worse, have some personal experience with an ADC and side effect management. So, it's important to remember that the side effects for all of the drugs, but definitely with ADCs, differ from drug conjugate to drug conjugate. And so that has a lot to do with the chemotherapy payload that is attached to it, and can also be due to the antibody itself. And so the example here is that, in Enhertu, because the antibody is trastuzumab, or what we also know as Herceptin, can cause heart issues. And so those are things that our oncologists have to really watch closely, are the different side effects that can come from either the chemotherapy drug or the antibody itself. And then sometimes the linker stability can play a role as well, how well the linker keeps the antibody and the chemotherapy together until they actually get to the target in the cell can impact how severe the side effects are for us, patients on those drugs. So next slide, please. So this talks a little bit then about some specific recommendations for the ADCs that are currently on the market. Enhertu can have a lot of nausea and vomiting. And so it's very common to receive either 3 or 4 drug cocktail as pre-medicine before you get your Enhertu infusion to help control those side effects. And then there are additionally drugs that can be taken after the infusion is given on treatment, on the days after treatment to help with those side effects as well. Another possible issue with Enhertu is interstitial lung disease or pneumonitis, and it's important for our oncologists, if you're on Enhertu, to watch that very closely. And the recommendation is to do a high-resolution CT scan every 12 weeks or sooner than that if you're having symptoms. And so depending on that, we may determine how long a patient could stay on Enhertu. For Trodelvy, the big side effects are low white cell counts and diarrhea, and those can really be controlled with dose reductions and other medications. And dose reduction is always an option, especially on ADCs, but with any of our drugs. In fact, I recently did a dose reduction with the Enhertu that I am receiving, and it has made my life a lot easier. So moving forward, in studying the antibody drug conjugates, it's going to be important to optimize dosing and the scheduling of getting the drugs, doing pharmacogenetic testing, which is really looking at the levels of drugs in our bodies after a certain amount of time when it's given. And they're doing some studies with wearable devices that might detect side effects earlier than patients would feel them, which is kind of a really cool thing that's coming down the pike. And then there's lots of drug engineering going on, as Amy mentioned. There's lots of new ADCs in development, and they're hoping to continue to lower the toxicity of those as those to do that. Because the whole idea, right, of antibody drug conjugates is targeting the chemotherapy directly to the cancer instead of going all the way through our bodies. But we're still learning a lot about how to do that really effectively.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to our show. I would like to acknowledge that all of the information on our podcast are from personal experiences and are not a substitute for professional medical advice. You should always contact your medical care team. If you're looking for specific topics or would like to be a guest on our show, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is laura@survivingbreastcancer.org. Until next time, keep on thriving.